I actually thought of something we should have said last week. A really funny gag.
What's that? Oh.
Right, so Susan Lewis was last week's guest.
Yes.
She's talking about George Clooney's Potbelly Pig, right?
Uh-huh.
But Susan and George Clooney was a character on ER. Oh, sorry, was an actor on ER.
Yes.
And Susan
Head
Lewis, Head Jiggle Man, and Susan Lewis was a character on ER.
Ah, yes.
That's but she should have gone up to him and been like, "My name's Susan Lewis."
Exactly.
You'd have loved it.
I mean, to be fair, if she had just approached him and said, "Hello, I'm Susan Lewis," and stared at him to get the joke, that might have freaked George out.
Also, your pigs just killed my dog.
He would have just shaken his head at her, smiled, and wandered off. He was like a living. What are those dolls called? The bobblehead
Cabbage
dolls.
Patch Kids. Bobbleheads, yes.
Yeah, that's what he was like in those days. There I go again. I'm slagging off George's
You really
acting.
hate George Clooney.
No, I don't.
I love how you can this criticism you've got of his acting.
I
This
know.
very successful Hollywood actor.
Like one of the biggest actors in Hollywood. I'm just like,
Don't get him started on Chris Nolan.
oh yeah. Well, that is a podcast in and of itself, but we can maybe save that for another episode after we've had Chris Nolan on the podcast, perhaps.
Obviously, yeah. Don't ruin our chance of getting the guy on by ripping him off.
But anyway, I should have said at the start that this is episode 180 of Page One, the Writers' Podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. And we have another great guest this week.
We do. We haven't said our own name. Is that?
Oh yes, sorry.
We've thrown ourselves by starting with the crazy banter.
Everything is off this week. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek, and we are joined by a very exciting guest this week, Gareth Rubin, who is a journalist. He started off as a journalist, writing about social affairs, travel, and the arts for various newspapers. He directed a documentary in 2013 about therapeutic art at the Bethlem Royal Hospital in London entitled Bedlam. And his books, he's written 3 books, the first of which is Liberation Square, set in Soviet-occupied London, then The Winter Agent, about British agents in Paris on the eve of D-Day, and his newest book is The Turnglass, which is a tête-bêche book, which for those that don't know what that is, and I didn't know what that was until recently, it's 2 stories which are back-to-back in a book, one of which is upside down and back to front, so you can read the book forward.
It's
or
printed.
flip it over and read it backwards.
It's printed so that you can pick the book up either way, and it looks like you're at the start of the book.
Very cool.
And each story is printed entirely one way, and the other one the other way. And you can read it in either direction. One is the earlier story is an Elizabethan Gothic, I think, and the second one is an American noir. But there is overlap between some of the characters and themes of the story. So it is a complete book. You have to read both to get the full experience.
Whereas traditionally a tête-bêche was 2 separate, unrelated stories.
But I think it can be, I think he gives the
19th
example of like you would get a Bible and another religious text with it or something
Quran.
like that. Yeah. No.
Just easy. Sell it to print one, sell it to two different people.
No,
smart.
that is not what happened. But before we get ourselves into trouble talking about that, I think we should just get straight into the podcast. And we will be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guests, in fact.
Oh, yes. But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the 3rd act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer? Because when I was preparing for this interview, I saw that you went to acting school, in fact.
I did. Well, I went to university, Red English University in St Andrews, before it was quite as trendy as it is now. And when I was there, I did a lot of acting, and I wanted to become an actor towards the end of university. And but I knew also I was also quite sensible. I knew that if you work as an actor, you actually spend most of your time acting in cafes and working in restaurants and it's the old joke, like, oh, you're an actor, what restaurant do you work at?
Yeah.
Anyway, but I was also quite sensible and decided I should get some kind of profession behind me where I could actually, earn enough to buy bread and rent. So I trained as a journalist. So I did postgrad in journalism straight after university. Worked as a journalist for 5-6 years. Actually had a whale of a time, to be honest, because it was the tail end of the good times in journalism before the bottom fell out of the market and there were massive cutbacks and no one had any money and newspapers all started closing down. But I was there. I started 1999, basically, when I saw some money floating around. And I had a great time. I did a lot of traveling, met some amazing people, did some really interesting articles, thoroughly enjoyed it. But after about 6 years, I decided, actually, I wanted to pursue the acting nonsense for a while. So I went to drama school, did a postgrad there. And after that, spent for 6-8 years, I suppose, combining the two, working as a journalist and doing a bit of acting here and there, a few Shakespeare tours, a bit of stage stuff. And then the acting sort of dried up and I'd had enough of it. I worked getting as a journalist for a couple of years and then decided to start writing books. So my first couple of books were non-fiction humor books. And then I started writing novels about 5-6 years ago. So my third one has just been published, called The Turnglass. Doing a hell of a lot better than the others. First one of mine to get onto Sunday Times bestseller list, so that's a bit of a break. And actually, that's just a potted history. The answer is I didn't always want to be a writer. I always kind of quite enjoyed writing. It was always, I guess, at the back of my mind. But there were other periods when I was doing other things, had other things very much on my mind.
And so, I mean, if we can sort of take that potted history in steps, you worked as a journalist, but then you wrote, as you said, sort of these humorous non-fiction books. How did they come about, I guess? Were they just ideas that you had, or was that something that came about as a result of your work in journalism?
No, just ideas I had when I had an idle moment sitting around in my friend's bar. There's no... There's a bit of a story about one of them that my first book was Guide to Britain's Worst Tourist Attractions, which kind of had the idea on a dreadful date with a Polish girl, which was actually a very nice Polish girl, but the date was pretty awful. Anyway, and the other one, which was a history of how the course of Britain's history has been changed by people making mistakes. I haven't for the faintest idea how I came up with that idea. It just came to me one night when I was, I don't know, watching late night TV or something. Just kind of pursued those, wrote them up, got paid kind of a pittance for it, but it was, it's kind of fun to get a book out on the shelves. So there they were, and they're still out there. I don't, I'm not kind of ashamed of them, but they don't really obviously kind of fit with the kind of the novel genre, which I write now. So I don't really kind of pursue them, but they're out there. I mention them from time to time. Enjoy doing them.
And so, what is it that made you think, right, I'll have a go at writing fiction then?
I don't know. Again, probably had an afternoon with very little to do, a lot of time on my hands. That's what happens when you're a freelance journalist. You spend a lot of time watching daytime television, daydreaming, walking the dog, thinking about shoplifting, and I don't know. It just seemed to me I could either shoplift or I could write a novel about murder, and it just seemed to make much more sense. Really, it's more in keeping with what my mum wanted for me.
So your first fiction book was Liberation Square.
It was.
Why don't you tell us, what happened there? Where did the kernel of that idea come from? How did you decide to take it into book writing?
It's for the very few people who haven't read it. It's a murder mystery set in Soviet-occupied London. So it's high concept, alt history with quite a lot of murder thrown in and suspicion. It's some of my favorite books are. I'm a huge fan of Rebecca by du Maurier, and there's quite a lot of Rebecca in Liberation Square, because the murder, the crime is essentially a sort of glamorous ex-wife of the central character's husband is murdered, and there's suspicion as to whether or not he did it, whether she did it, some third party did it. Anyway, and this is all set within this alt history structure of Soviet-occupied London, which I just found quite interesting to kind of. I live in London. I'm not from here originally, but I live here, and it's quite interesting to kind of walk the streets and see where the wall, which I posit in the book, runs and kind of snakes up Regent Street, which is kind of famous, hugely famous central street in London. And I kind of wonder what life really must have been like, kind of being on one side of the wall and seeing your family on the other side of the wall, or not seeing them, knowing they're there, knowing they're 12 meters away from you, not being able to talk to them, just being kind of divided from the life that you knew. And of course, this is obviously what happened to the people of Berlin, that suddenly one day they were literally just kind of cut off from their jobs, from their friends, from their family, from the places they used to walk and buy their bread and their milk. And that kind of upheaval is as dreadful, I imagine, as the kind of war that, or almost as dreadful, I guess, in some ways as the war that they'd been through, in terms of dividing yourself from yourself. And anyway, so that's where that book came from.
And what was the road to publication with that one? Did you have an agent already with the other books you had done, or did you have to find an agent?
I had agents, but they weren't interested in representing me for fiction, which is fine. It's what they did. So I had to get a new agent. So I wrote it up, or first draft, showed it to friends, got feedback from friends, which is an important part of the process. But I think one of the issues that new authors come across, one of the mistakes they often make, is showing your manuscript to friends who are going to be too positive. Basically, people who are far too close to you. A much better person is someone you slightly know and doesn't like you very much, because what you really need is criticism. Praise is great, is really nice, but it's absolutely useless if you're trying to write a book, or at least get your book published. What you really need is somebody who hates it, somebody who finds all the problems with it and bangs on and on about them until you give in and change them. Because everyone's opinion is valid, is as valid as the next guy's. That a reviewer's opinion of your book is no more important, frankly, than your next door neighbor's, as long as it's a genuine opinion. Because the people you're trying to sell your book, you should never, no author, no writer should ever lose sight of the fact that you're this is a publishing industry. It's not a publishing hobby. You're trying to sell your book, and the people on the street who are as likely to be your buyers are the ones whose opinion you care about, and there are 10,000 of them on the street with 10,000 different opinions. So what you want to do is find someone who has who thoroughly dislikes a lot of your book, and work on those parts. And you can try to boost a little bit the bits they do like, but it's sorting out the problems with your book, which is what you need to spend 80% of your time doing.
And how did you find all this kind of process? Obviously, this was the first fiction book you'd written. You've written a couple of factual ones already, but this kind of editing process, was it? Obviously, you had a lot of experience doing this in your books and in your journalism job. Was it similar? Was it something you're used to, or was it harder because it was fiction?
It was a bit harder because it was fiction. It's true, partly because non-fiction, when you're writing, before you get a contract for the book, you only write a sample. You only write 10,000 words, whereas if you're writing a novel, you're writing 110,000, which is just so much more commitment of your life, frankly. It's to the point where you're sort of missing friends' birthdays, whatever, and you're spending a lot of time on your own rather than just kind of fitting a bit of writing around other things. And the articles, when I wrote, they'd take me a day or 2 days instead of best part of a year, which is what Liberation Square took me. Before then, I should also say that I'd written a couple of other novels which just never got published and never have been published. Okay. One of which is dreadful, never will be. Another one, which I think is quite good, I would like to get published one day, maybe. But it's just kind of sitting at the bottom of my laptop because it doesn't quite fit with the kind of books I'm writing right now. So maybe at some point in a few years' time, I'll drag it out. But also that's also something that new writers have to get used to. That is spending a lot of time on something which never goes anywhere.
Yeah.
The most successful authors have a lot of unpublished books behind them. I think Alistair MacLean, I think Where Eagles Dare, I think was his 13th book and the first to get published or something crazy like that. So you have to expect it. Of course, some people write their first manuscript and send it out to agents and send it out to 10 agents, and 10 of them say they want to represent them, and they get a £500,000 advance from the first publisher it's sent to. But they're 1 in 50. The vast majority of writers write books which never get anywhere, and then find success with their third, fourth novel. So you need to be ready for 3 years of slog before you get anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how did you find your agent? What was your journey there? Was it a lot of querying, or did you get picked up fairly soon?
I got picked up fairly soon. With the one which got published. Those which never got published, that nobody was kind of interested in representing them, which is probably why it was never published. But the Liberation Square, I think I sent, I don't know how many agents I sent it to, 25 maybe, right. And 2 or 3 offered to represent me, which isn't a bad strike rate. One thing I do say to new authors is you get in all this sort of authors advice books, they always say target your which agents you're going to go to, look through a list, see if they're going to be a good match. That's rubbish. Send to absolutely everyone, because if you get 1 out of 100 who offers to represent you, you're doing well. Yeah, you've got to put a lot of legwork in. And I'm sorry, agents. I'm apologizing to my agent now, who's probably going to get a mountain of requisition letters. But it's the way it is. Don't target it, because unless you're writing next blockbuster, you're lucky if you get one who's offering to represent you out of all the agents in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Liberation Square came out, and then The Winter Agent quickly followed that. Was it a 2-book deal that you got when you were
It
signed up?
was. It was
Yeah.
from Penguin. And then so the Liberation came out a year afterwards. Unfortunately, a year after Liberation Square, it was lockdown. So it came out in the absolute depths of lockdown. That basically a month into the very first lockdown, when nobody knew what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
All the bookshops were closed. The bakeries were closed. Everything was closed. So literally, people couldn't buy the book. They couldn't even get it from Amazon. Even Amazon couldn't get hold of it. Which was a real pity, because I do like that book. I think it's some of my best work. And it got good reviews. Unfortunately, people literally couldn't buy it.
Yeah.
I often wonder, how do publishers look at that kind of, a horrible perfect storm of things just happening outside your control like that? Because obviously everyone talks about, you got to hit your sales targets and you want to get your advance paid back, etc., etc. But when something like that happens, which is, you've got no control over it, they've got no control over it, people just physically cannot buy the book and it must impact sales. Do they take quite a understanding view of that, or is it still quite stressful?
I don't know. The fact is that, the sales are very low for understandable reasons. I didn't earn out my advance, probably never will on that book. The publishers just, well, there's nothing they can do, nothing I can do. They're not going to re-release it. That would be pointless. Yeah, I think it was Penguin. I think they just took the hit. There's nothing else that can be done, really.
Yeah. And so your new book you mentioned at the start is The Turnglass. And as we'll discuss in a moment, it's got what is certainly these days quite an unusual structure. But do you want to tell us a little bit about The Turnglass?
Sure. Well, the structure you mentioned, it's called a tête-bêche book. That means that it's two stories printed back to back and head to foot. So you read the first story, which finishes about halfway through the book, then flip the book over head to foot and you read the other one. And you can read them in either direction, either one first, and they're devilishly entwined. So that when you read the first story, although they are both standalone stories, so you could in theory just read one and it would make sense. You read the first one and then you read the second one, and the first you get a whole new perspective on the first one. Yes, it's an unusual structure, tête-bêche. They were not unknown, or better known in 18th, 19th centuries, when they were used for printing two books back to back. They're very often religious books, so you get a Bible and a book and a psalter or something on the other side.
Okay.
Occasionally, people do it with novels or with sort of non-fiction books, which go together as pairs. But they, for economic reasons, quite simply, they'd print them together within a single binding. So as my book has essentially sort of two front covers, a blue one and a red one, and you can start with either, or you can what some people have done is you can read a chapter from each, alternating, and that's I think that's the kind of dungeon master level reading experience. I'm impressed with people who've done that, but they seem to find it really interesting and really sort of immersive to do it that way.
And well, I was going to ask this: how did you pitch that? What did your editor or agent say when you said, "This is what I'm going to do for my next book"?
Well, my agent, John Wood, he was previously an editor. He's previously a publisher at Orion, so he knows the industry from every direction, which is great. And I put it to him, and he just thought it's a brilliant idea. We were bouncing a few ideas around, and he said, "Yeah, absolutely, that's the one to go for." People are going to be so interested, and they were. We got a number of when we sent it out, we got a number of responses. Quite a lot of them were, "What the hell is this? Have you lost your mind? Get out of this office, or we're calling the police." But a few of them were more positive. Yeah, I call those the undecided. A few of them more positive, and we got some really good offers. And in the end, went with Simon and Schuster, because my editor editor there, who I happen to know personally as well, is just a great editor, and I was really happy to go with her.
Brilliant.
Now the voices of each kind of half of the book are very different. You know, one's a kind of American noir and one's a kind of English Victorian historical vibe. And you know, it was obviously that was a conscious choice to make them feel very, very different, even though they're interlinked. And was it difficult to drop in and out those voices, to change, or did you write one and then flick over to the other one?
Yeah, I essentially wrote the. You're right that one side's American noir and the other's essentially is for English, classic English Gothic. I wrote the English Gothic, then the American noir, but I had to kind of keep turning back and changing bits because they are very intertwined, and they're clues to each in the other story. Which is quite an interesting kind of, I guess, kind of intellectual exercise in a way. But it was the voices, the tone of the two. Yeah, that it is quite interesting that the narrative voice of an English noir novel is very different to an American hard-boiled noir. And it was quite fun, actually, kind of playing with those two, and kind of working out, what words that a third-person narrator of an English Gothic novel uses, which would never be in an American lexicon. So the English noir is set in the 1880s. The American, the English Gothic in 1880s Essex. The American noir is in 1939 America, and so I had to do research not only into what the status of people was in those times, what the buildings were like, but also into what the slang was, what kind of rhythm people had when they were speaking. It's interesting that Gothic, the English Gothic and American noir are essentially it's inversions of each other. And the book is all about inversion. So you physically turn it over. And it's about people whose state is kind of inverted. And it's about two houses, both called Turnglass House, one of which is, an inversion of the other. And it's English. It's interesting because the American noir is essentially an upside down version of English Gothic, the tone, the style. Because English Gothic is all about people isolated in country houses or sort of medieval Gothic towers in the middle of nowhere, where they're haunted by ghosts, and they can't see who's after them. Whereas American noir is set in the city, and it's the hero character is surrounded by people but he feels very isolated, and he can see all around him the people he has to go after instead of not being able to see them. And the streets are very busy instead of being empty, so that they are noir and Gothic are up down versions of each other. And it's interesting because when American writers of the 1930s and 1920s started writing the Chandlers, Dashiell Hammett, etc., they always took basically English Gothic by the scruff of the neck, flipped it upside down and stuck it in Los Angeles, and did something really interesting with it. And I was just kind of I really did enjoy playing with those two different styles and different traditions.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it is, and it sounds like, given you're writing two different stories, but there are all these interlinked things. I mean, did you spend time outlining it, planning it out, or are you more of a sort of pantser type writer?
I'm very much the pantser. Which it sounds a really weird thing to say. I'm terrible at planning. I gave up, after my first book or two, the ones which never got anywhere. I gave up trying to plan books. I'm just no good at it. I'm very jealous of people who can. I will, but whenever I try planning out chapter by chapter a book, I just veer off 10 minutes into the book into complete off at a tangent, and all I've done is waste a couple of days of planning time. No, I have a beginning. I usually start with an image, a visual image of for the book, and I have a vague idea where it's heading towards the end, but the middle bit, 98% of it, I can only make up as I go along.
It's funny because, I mean, looking at this book, I imagine it must have been one which you spent a lot of time planning and, the way that the two stories intertwine, etc. But it's interesting to find that you just kind of went with it. And then was it a case of going back afterwards and working out how they all tie up?
Yeah, that's basically it. It's a kind of long-winded way of doing it, but it's the only way I can do it. That essentially, I wrote two stories and then went back and processed them, and re-engineered this bit, took that bit out, shoved it in the other story, that kind of thing. Yeah, It's the only way it works for me.
And I read, I mean, you're not the first guest to say this, actually, but I read that you actually loathe, maybe that's too strong a word, but you don't enjoy the writing process.
No, I loathe it. It disgusts me. I hate it. Another warning out for any new authors. You're going to be spending a lot of time on your laptop, isolated, unwashed, hungry, wondering where the next delivery is coming from. I don't like sitting at my laptop in a cold, quiet room, but it's frankly it's the only way I can actually get work done. I'm very, very easily distracted. I'm distracted right now talking to you by the fact that there are cars going past my window. There's probably a pigeon on my roof. He's distracting me. He's having an argument with his girlfriend. I don't know. It's about the gas bill or something. I'm very easily distracted. So the best environment for me is basically it's a prison cell. I'm not talking morally. I don't belong in a prison cell. That's not what I'm saying. Whenever I want to get work done, the best way for me to do it historically has been to check into the cheapest room in the cheapest hotel on Kent Coast that I can find. The last one I was in had bed bugs. It was that great. For a while, I used to go to the Albion Hotel in Brighton, which is where I wrote the first words of The Winter Agent. Actually, very first words written in the hotel room there, until it burned down 2 weeks ago. Burnt to ground. It's a pity. It's this really old historical hotel where kings were stayed. It's featured in Brighton Rock by Graham Greene, and then it just went up in flames a couple of weeks ago. So I'm not going back there.
That's a shame. And in the process, once you have got these drafts and you've spent time intertwining these stories and stuff, I mean, how do you deal with editorial feedback and things like that? Has your time in journalism sort of hardened you to
100%
accepting of these things?
100%. I'll tell you what, the feedback you get from publishing editors is nothing to what you get from an editor on a daily newspaper. I've never been called a bastard by my own editor in publishing. It's never been physically threatened by my book editor.
That's good.
It's a much softer environment. So if anything, I'm always telling my book editors, to be a lot harsher, because harsh feedback is what you need. Like I said earlier, praise is very nice, but it doesn't actually help you write a better book.
And obviously you said you don't enjoy or you utterly loathe the writing itself, but your books, I'm assuming, require a lot of research and research. Looking at your previous job, your previous books, you've obviously done a lot of research on a lot of topics. So is that something you enjoy? Is that something you're quite good?
Not really. Some can be quite interesting.
It's a miserable life. But...
it's not as bad as writing. Some can be quite interesting. The last book, The Winter Agent, that was a hell of a lot of research because it's about British agents in occupied Paris on the eve of D-Day. So I had to research, but it's also set in Berlin and London at the same time. So I had to research conditions in all three cities. I had to research what the hit records were in Berlin at the time, who the most popular film stars were in France in 1944. I had to learn all about SS uniforms and what insignia they had, the air speeds of various British fighter planes. There was a lot of research, because if there's anyone who's going to write in complaining you got your facts wrong, it's World War II buffs. I'll tell you that. So that was more research than I've ever done before. There was one point one of the characters is Admiral Canaris, who was who really was the German head of the Abwehr, which is the military intelligence division. He was an interesting character who ended up towards the end, he was actually an anti-Nazi, and he was captured by the Nazis and sent to a concentration camp, where he was executed by garroting in front of a number of other SS officers. Anyway, he was an interesting character, and I read a biography of him, and I found absolutely nothing there of any use for my book whatsoever. So, but I wasn't going to waste that. The only thing I found of any interest was that he liked to cook. So there's a scene in the book which is absolutely trivial, irrelevant, but which mentions that the fact he likes to cook. The only reason it's in the book is so that I could get something out of having read a biography of him over 4 days.
Well, I was going to ask that, because obviously when you're doing lots of research for these books, you don't, the best historical fiction, I guess, sort of gives you a sense of that time and place, but it doesn't just drown you in lots of facts about it. So how do you know what you want to put in, what you need to leave out, and that sort of thing?
It is quite distressing having to take out really interesting facts that you've tracked down. But yeah, if you don't, then you are just you're basically writing a history book, and you get bogged down and you just don't get on with the plot, which is pity. Like at least 20%, I guess, of the stuff of the really interesting historical material you have to take out in the end. I think David Mamet once said that writing was easy. You just write good scenes that move the plot along. Sorry, move the story along. That's what he said. And he's right. You have to keep moving the story along. You're not writing a historical textbook. You're not writing a travelogue in which you just kind of give really interesting color about the place you're visiting. You are writing a story, and it has to keep moving.
And are you setting it? It's set obviously in a historical time, but you're wanting to capture the flavor of it rather. How accurate do you feel you need to be, or is it the story that comes first, as long as it's capturing the essence of that time? That
is actually a really tricky question. As an example, in The Winter Agent, all these British agents, they're part of the Special Operations Executive. And SOE, in reality, agents would have 3 different types of code name. They'd have their code name, which is used within SOE itself. They'd have a cover name, which is their local name. They'd have their own name, of course. If I started referring to my characters by 3 different names in different contexts, and there are 5 characters with 3 different names, it's just going to become so confusing for the reader, and tedious and tiresome. It's in it'll be like a 19th century Russian novel where they all have their own name, a patronymic, and a pet name, and a nickname as well, and you never know who you're actually reading about, especially since they're 600 characters. So I had to simplify that, which is historically inaccurate, and it was a bit of a wrench for me to do something which I knew was historically inaccurate. But yeah, it would just be too jarring and too annoying for the reader to be accurate in that place.
And obviously, The Turnglass is out and it's received great reviews. Sunday Times bestseller. I remember being down at Harrogate this year, and there was massive walls of it in the tent inside. Fantastic adverts and stuff. I mean, you must be pretty happy with how this book has been received, especially compared with your first 2. Then.
Oh yeah, over the moon. It's a great feeling seeing. It's basically because my publisher's behind me. and seeing, how much effort they're putting into it and how well people are responding to it. And it's a feedback loop, of course, that, the more the readers enjoy it, the more publishers get excited about it. The more publishers get excited about it, the more reviewers do, and then the more readers read about it. It's great, to see it kind of spiraling upwards in these ways. And yeah, that it means that you get your publisher's interested in giving you a second contract, and the next book, because it's a 2-book contract I'm on, so I'm just finishing off the edits actually for the second book of that 2-book contract. And yeah, it means that more people will be interested in this book, and yeah, I'm just really, really happy with the way it's all gone.
And can you give us a hint as to what the next book is about?
I can tell you exactly what it's about.
Even better.
I know a lot of writers don't like to kind of mention it. This one's actually it's a Sherlock Holmes novel.
Oh,
I haven't decided on the title yet, but the hook is that it's a book. It's a story where Holmes and Moriarty have to work together on a case.
Okay,
nice. And I mean, how is, when you're working on a book like Sherlock Holmes novel, how does that work? Do you need to get invited in? Do you ask to do that, or is it just free? Anyone can do it. And there's no. So there's no issue at all with it. Yeah.
No, it's out of copyright completely. Anyone can write one. You guys can write one where he's a frog if you want, and no one can do anything.
Yeah. Great. Well, when will that one be out then? And all being well.
A year, give or take.
Excellent.
Yeah, we haven't set a date yet, but usually your second book comes out a year after your first. It's roughly how it works.
Has it given you, all your books are standalones. Has it given you a sense that you might want to go back to Sherlock Holmes at some point, or is this your Sherlock Holmes story and now you want to do something else?
No, I might well do a sequel. I'm probably working on a sequel to The Turnglass, actually.
Right. Okay.
Just have to decide that with my publishers, and they seem pretty open to the idea.
Would you want to keep the same format, the 2 halves?
Well, I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I don't know. We'll have to think about that.
One thing with that just struck me with the tête-bêche, obviously, it's very for it to have the full impact. It's very much about the physical copy, isn't it? An ebook of it is not going to be the same thing at all.
No, and we unless you want to just stand on your head while reading the ebook. Literally no other way of doing it. We also had this discussion about the audiobook.
Yeah.
The producer wanted to interweave the different chapters for the audiobook, and my editor and I thought it's going a bit far, because there are some characters who appear in both stories. So if you're interweaving the stories, 2 stories, one set in 1880, one set in 1939, some of the same characters in, it'd be really confusing for the listener, because they won't know which story they're listening to sometimes, because they'll just hear the same character. So we had to say, no, you'll have to do it in chronological order, doing the first story, the earlier story first. But yes, it's much as I like print, also I quite like having an e-reader. I've got nothing. A lot of authors, a bit sniffy about them. I've got nothing against them. I quite like it. It is a pity that if you read it in the ebook version or listen to the audiobook, you just don't get that sense of turning things over.
Yeah.
And given that the book is it's a tête-bêche book about tête-bêche books. Mm-hmm. In a sense, you are missing out, quite a lot of the story and the point of the book.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously, I'm sure I know your answer to this question would be there is no right or wrong way to read them. I'm assuming there's no right or wrong way to read them. You can read either one in any order, but you do have to decide which one you put first, because there is, there's still that kind of normal way to hold the book, which you and I suppose you flip it upside down. It's
there isn't. It's either way.
So there is no right way to hold the book.
Well, it is.
My little
frankly,
brain can't hold this concept. I'm losing.
I know what you mean. having
I
counted
suppose in
this
the
before.
ebook or the audiobook, you're choosing which story to hear at have first. I suppose.
Yeah. In the audiobook and the ebook, we start with we do it in chronological order. So the earlier story comes first, simply because, for most people, it's just easier to keep track of what's going on that way. Some people do read the later story first when they're reading the hardback, and that's fine. And as I said, some people interweave chapters from each, which is quite an interesting way of doing it. But for most people, they'll go for the earlier story first, which I think is probably certainly an easier way of reading the book.
Okay.
What was the last book that you read?
Well, I have an 18-month-old daughter, so the last book I read was Pepper's Pumpkin Party. I can recommend to anyone. It's actually a bit gothic. You discover that Madame Gazelle is in fact a vampire.
Plot spoilers! I've not actually read that one yet.
Sorry, yeah. There are Peppa Pig fans out there who got to come after me now. Of adult books, I recently read An Instance of the Finger Post by Ian Pearce, which is brilliant novel, very clever. Also kind of plays about with form and format, like my books. So, if you like The Turnglass, I'd recommend An Instance of the Finger Post. I tend to read within the genres in which I write.
Mm.
So when I was writing The Wood Trajan, which is a spy novel, I was reading Le Carré, and I was reading, other high-end spy stories. When I'm writing most of the Gothic stuff, then I'll read most of Gothic novels, which An Instance of the Finger Post is some Gothic mystery.
Cool. What about the last film that you watched?
Last film I watched, that would be Hotel Transylvania, again with my daughter. But it's I mean, she wanted
vampires. I see.
Yeah, it is. It's about Dracula and his daughter, who I don't need to go into the plot of Hotel Transylvania.
I've seen Hotel Transylvania.
It's
very good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, my daughter wandered off, but I watched it to the end.
Kept your attention. That's the main thing.
Well, TV show, is that Peppa Pig perhaps, or
quite a lot of Pepper right now. Only Murders in the Building. My wife and I really enjoy that. It's great fun. Yeah. Steve Martin back on form after a lot of very dodgy films in the early 2000s. Not dodgy in a sort of adult kind of way, but just bad films. He did a lot of really bad films.
Not funny, sadly.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, he is definitely back on form with that.
So recommend that.
And the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and we always see there's no right answer here apart from perhaps one. But we'll start off with The Name of the Rose, the book or the film.
God, that's a really difficult question. I'll tell you what though, not the TV series.
Okay.
TV series was bad.
I didn't know there was a TV series of it, actually.
Yeah, it came out a year ago, 2 years ago.
Oh right, okay.
There's a lot of really good actors in, but it's really bad script. And the worst thing about it is they added material in just to extend it to 6 episodes or something.
Oh, right.
So you get Umberto Eco's story, and then you get Johnny Walker's story, who's just this 23-year-old American hired in from writing sitcoms. Who hasn't got a clue what he's doing. But the film or the book? I guess the book. I'm not snobby about films, and I think The Name of the Rose, the film, is very good. I think it does for a long book. The Name of the Rose is a long book. And they pared it down for the film so much. They just kept in the bare bones of the mystery. Mm-hmm. But what's really interesting about one of the really interesting things about the book is that it goes off at such tangents. It goes on about, there's a lot of semiology there. There's a lot of medieval Catholic Church politics and history of heresies, which it just has to be cut out of the book. There's a film, otherwise the film would be 40 hours long. But God, I'm going to sit on the fence and say either of them.
Okay.
Horses for courses, whichever you prefer.
TV or cinema?
Cinema's much more fun, I think, than TV. I think, it's such an immersive experience when the lights are off and you're sitting there with your popcorn and
Yeah.
there's someone 3 rows back talking on their phone. You have to throw your popcorn at them.
Wonderful.
I was called rude once in the cinema for asking someone to shut up, stop talking on their phone.
I'm a bit of a cinema Nazi. I'm not sure if you're allowed to call yourself that anymore, but yeah, I hate people talking in cinemas. It's like one of my. I very rarely get angry about stuff, but that I really cannot stand. I mean, I remember going to see Lost World Jurassic Park, and someone had an apple and ate an apple and it's so loud. I thought that was incredibly rude.
It wasn't a great film.
Yeah,
It was also shit film, which didn't help. Yeah.
That didn't help. I just couldn't understand. I mean, why did she come to the cinema and just spend half an hour talking on the phone to a friend?
I know.
What's the point? Anyway, go
on. Night owl or early bird?
Well, it used to be a night owl, but until my daughter arrived, and now it's 5:30 or 6 a.m. starts. I used to be, my previous life was going to bed between 12 and 1 a.m., getting up about 9. But now it's getting up at 6 a.m. and going to bed at 9:30.
Yeah. Music or no music when you're writing?
None. I have to basically have sensory deprivation. I sit in the quietest, most boring place I can with headphones on, playing white noise to block out any sound.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
Yeah, do you know what? I quite like ebooks. I think sitting there with, my book with Turnglass aside, which doesn't work in the ebook, I quite like sitting with an e-reader. Because it's lit. I can read it can hold it in one hand. It's more comfortable. I go for ebooks.
Very glad
Screw
to
you,
say that.
traditionalists.
Very few authors are on the same side as us, Gareth. So
Yeah.
I think we're up to 6 now, so that's nice.
Right.
So I laughed at you last week, Tarek, when you said that the ebooks were catching up, but we've suddenly got 2 in a row. I don't think that's ever happened before.
Momentum's building. It's just that I can feel my people around me now. This is it.
You've selected these guests very well, but
I pre-check before they come on.
Yeah, exactly. Send them a little questionnaire. Thanks very much to Gareth for taking the time to come on. I really enjoyed that chat, and
it's great.
I thought really interesting. Obviously, the whole concept of a tête-bêche novel I think is really interesting. I always like books that play with form and structure, things like House Leaves and things like that. I agree. Absolutely. But the when he pointed out that noir and gothic really are kind of inversions of each other, which I hadn't ever occurred to me before.
No, I hadn't thought about it in that way either.
But I thought that was really interesting. And now he's going on to write a Sherlock Holmes story as well, which is quite cool. Yeah.
And also interesting how much he hates writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Just can't be honest with it.
yeah, exactly. Which, to be fair, I think a lot of writers will feel at some point.
Yes, but especially that first draft, I think, it's painful, isn't it?
Well, some people really hate the redrafting bit as well. Writers all seem to have although everyone seems to hate about 30,000 words into their book.
There is that psychological wall, which is just
terrible.
I find that moment of this is the worst book in the world, it's not working, always comes very soon after the feeling of this is the best book anyone's ever written. This is amazing, and you go from it's like dizzying high. I think that's why it feels so bad, because you've been so high, and then it's like, no, it's shit.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the trick is to push through to the end, because by then you probably think, okay, it's all right. I'll send this off to my agent. Hopefully,
and then after 2 months in a drawer, you're like, oh, actually, this is incredible again.
Exactly.
It's a wonderful circle.
If you haven't read The Turnglass, highly recommend it. You can pick that up now. I'll put a link in the podcast description for that. But thanks very much to Gareth for coming on to the podcast. Next week, as I hinted at the start, we have not one but 2 guests.
We do have 2 guests. Cassandra Caw and Richard Kadri are our 2 guests next week, both of whom are very successful authors, writers in their own right, having written for various outlets, video game outlets. They've written non-fiction books. They've written articles in Wired, Interzone, etc. They've written horror novels, short stories. They've won awards. Really, two massively successful authors, and are now collaborating on a book called Dead Take the A-Train, which is out at the end of October. So yeah, it's a very exciting chat we have with them.
Yeah, no, always interesting to hear, especially we've spoken to authors before who have collaborated.
But never both of them together.
Never at the same time.
Yeah,
so interesting to hear the process and how they went through that, which turned out to be basically they both write a book. And then they both write the same book, and then they have to try and merge them together. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's a great chat. So please do join us for that one. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, as that always helps us to continue to get great guests.
And I'm going to pause at this moment here to say something we should have said at the very start of the episode, which is congratulations to Marco, who has now signed with the wonderful Francesca at Kate Nash as an agent.
Thank you very much.
Exciting.
Yes, it's been a very, very long journey to get here, but I am the embodiment of what we say on the podcast.
Absolutely, genuinely, that's exactly it. Yeah.
You have to keep going, and eventually someone will get sick of you and say yes.
But it totally just does prove the point, isn't it? That like everyone who. The only writers that don't get published are the ones that stop trying. It's about just continually putting stuff out there.
That's right.
And for those that aren't aware of how Marco got his agent, it was a pitch competition he did at the Bloody Scotland Festival, and he pitched his upcoming historical thriller novel, and there was an agent in the audience who listened to it and liked it, and then wanted to chat to him further about it. So it just shows you that you never know, what an opportunity might bring, and you might think, oh, this is a waste of time doing this competition or whatever. Go for it, because you never know who's listening.
100%. I mean, I think in all seriousness, what I would take out of that and what I would say to everyone is that if you have the opportunity to pitch or talk to someone about your writing directly that is involved in the industry, whether it's an editor or an agent, take it, because it gives you, you skip over all the slush piles. It gives you an opportunity to speak directly to that person. Doesn't always mean that it's going to end up in someone saying they want to take you on, but what is it they say? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
100%. 100%. And you go to these things. There's always the people, the agents who are there. They're looking for people. They're there for the reason of, is there anyone here that I might like? So it's 100%. Take that shot. Yeah, always worth it.
So now. I was actually picked up on the basis of partially finished manuscripts, and now I need to actually finish the rest of the book.
Which, as we all know, is the worst part.
Yeah, exactly. As Gareth says, that's the really bad part. I haven't actually write it, but yeah. But yeah, thanks for mentioning that. How can people get in touch with us, Tarek?
Well, if folk would like to get in touch to say congratulations to Marco and send us a question, they can always do so via our email address, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or they can get in touch via the variety of social media platforms. Just search for @UKPage1, unless you are the one person out there who's still using Mastodon, in which case it's writing.exchange/@page1pod.
But otherwise, have a great week, and we will speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.